a lot of you are quite I'm sure a lot of you are quite familiar with bipolar disorder, but just in case this is useful for anyone, generally, bipolar disorder is a term that's used to describe a pattern of extreme disruptions to how a person feels, thinks, behaves, and responds physically. Stereotypically, it tends to be defined by mood swings between two particular poles. So at one pole there's a mania, which is a feeling of elation and a high period, and at the other end is depression, which is a kind of obviously a period of low. So I mean, when we think about the term bipolar disorder, we tend to imagine this kind of undulation of kind of experiencing these kind of incredibly intense, exciting periods, and then these really crushing, awful depressions. Of course, this varies on a continuum, and the experience of bipolar disorder will be different, of course, between people. There are kind of variations in regards to how much swing there is between mania and depression. But mainly, individuals are most likely to be given a bipolar diagnosis if the mood changes are so severe enough to disrupt the person's functioning. This is when they're likely to come into contact with services, and this is when a diagnosis is likely to be made. I think this kind of two-tone or this two aspects of experience is quite important, and I just wanted to very briefly touch upon some of the kind of a very, very, very brief history of bipolar disorder, but also to show that the idea of mania and melancholy have been really influential within our society's way of thinking about mental illness for quite some time. So this image on the right, which used to flank the heads of the Bethlehem Hospital in London, is supposed to show melancholy on the left and raving madness on the right. So again, this representation of madness, as it was known then, as being between the state of kind of elation or mania and, of course, a kind of catatonic melancholic state. We can actually see kind of discussing at least a potential link between melancholia and mania as happening within one, is it within a single person, as far back as you have to forgive my Arterius of Cappadocia back in 30 to 150 AD, who saw that both melancholia and mania were supposedly related to black bile, the substance of black bile in the body. And when we start to move into 19th century psychiatry, and the reason that I mention this is quite interesting, is this role of monomania. But what I think was notable was this idea of a single pathological preoccupation in an otherwise normal mind. And we'll see that this is something that kind of is quite distinguishing about bipolar or contemporary understandings of bipolar disorder. And this is the idea of episodes of mania and depression, but otherwise kind of normal periods of a more kind of stable mood. And this seems to have been noted for quite some time. In 1854, two guys from France, Jean-Pierre Falleret and Jules Ballinger, actually fell out about what they wanted to term this disorder. So Falleret described it as circular insanity, and Ballinger described it as dual form insanity. So again, this idea of a kind of a binary of two opposing extremes is really important. Of course, Kraepelin in the late 19th century. This is kind of interesting, I think, because he regarded it as manic depressive psychosis. And again, this was on this understanding that individuals could behave relatively normally after episodes. So it was this idea of in the way in which these kind of extreme undulations of emotion seem to interrupt. They seem to kind of punctuate a kind of person's otherwise fairly normal lifespan, if you like. Jung kind of distinguished this down further by seeing a difference between type 1 and type 2. So in type 1, we have mania involving a possible psychosis, whereas type 2 is mania without psychosis. And Jung's classification remains fairly influential in contemporary DSM diagnostic criteria. So again, we've been playing around with this idea that actually there may be something about psychosis within the experience of bipolar disorder. But I think what remains is this what I think is really important here is this idea of noting that there's something about these being temporary periods of time. And that I think is quite important. So we can see here on this kind of mainly sort of these types of bipolar, so there's bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, and then psychothermia, which is kind of a slightly more milder, if you like, where we don't quite get up to the levels of mania, and then a kind of a baseline. So anyway, I mean, these are just kind of ways in which, you know, that we've tried to conceptualize bipolar disorder, but also the kind of thinking that the participants in this study will be familiar with. Okay, this was, I mean, Kay Redfield Jamison's book, An Unquiet Mind, is a fascinating. Back to Kay Redfield Jamison's point, you know, this idea about which of the feelings are the real me. Is it the wild, impulsive, chaotic, energetic and crazy one, or the shy, withdrawn, desperate, suicidal, doomed and tired one? Probably a bit of both, hopefully much that is neither. And I think that's really important. How do we make sense of ourselves when we have such different mind states and they play such a huge part in our life? So we'll be revisiting that shortly. Okay, so this is kind of, I just, you know, thought it's important to include a kind of a whistle stop kind of introduction to compassion focused therapy. I think it's, so to start with, I think it's important for us to distinguish what's a model of therapy from specific therapeutic techniques and interventions. So compassion-focused therapy, then, it's very much a science-based. We're very interested in science across all different kinds of disciplines, and we're very focused on research. So our research findings play, you know, hugely inform our practice and etc. We consider ourselves to be an integrative model, an integrative in the sense of which of psychotherapeutic integration, but also integrative in a multidisciplinary or an interdisciplinary way. So we consider ourselves to be kind of multidimensional, but also, again, this interest across the sciences. It's an evolutionary informed biopsychosocial approach to the human mind. So we draw a lot on evolutionary psychology, and very much a biopsychosocial approach to understanding the human mind. I mean, as somebody with a background in anthropology, my interests are a lot within kind of the social, but I think how these three, you know, biopsychosocial, all kind of interact together is really, really important. CFT is really interested in addressing the dark side, which I suppose makes it sound like the episode of Star Wars that you've yet to see, but really we're kind of really interested in how we can promote caring connectedness and how we can promote caring minds, caring mentalities within people. And, you know, we're very aware of kind of the growing literature base about the significance of social connectedness, you know, both in regards to what happens within our bodies, but also what we kind of need on all kinds of different levels. So a lot of our work, and a lot of the work that now is branching into working in businesses and schools, etc., is looking at how we can promote caring connections within each other. And this is towards ourselves, but also in regards to our relationship with other people. So we are kind of interested in prosociality and the relationship between prosociality and well-being. Okay, so just a kind of brief, quick look at some of the kind of basic CFT processes and interventions. You'll see they bear a lot of, you know, some of them bear similarities with others that you're probably familiar with. We use quite a lot of basic micro skills, so open voices, closed questionings, paraphrasing, summarizing, reflecting. We're interested in non-verbal communication. You know, the therapeutic relationship is really significant, alliance building. So all of those kind of things. And I think this is as testament as well as to how we're learning from each other within a community. And how, you know, how we can draw from the skills that we're all kind of learning within our own kind of patch to support our own work. We're really interested in therapy process, particularly I think collaboration, and I'll talk a bit more about that later plays quite an important role, about how therapy can be a collaborative process. Again, things like Socratic dialogues and guided discovery. We do a lot of things like functional analysis, chaining analysis, reframing, or basically all kinds of different things. And we're also very interested in change through guided practice. So, you know, we do draw on a lot of meditation and mindfulness practices. And the reason that we do that is that we're really interested in how we can help our clients to facilitate physiological shifts. So we know that breathing, for example, can have quite distinct changes on our physiology. It can make us feel in different ways. So how can we use that within psychotherapy to help our clients access things that are kind of different, that can be quite difficult to do? So there is a kind of a strong emphasis on actually how we use guided practice as well for self-discovery, and for guided discovery that's really important, but how we can also use different practices to kind of, you know, guided physiological practices to help kind of change things. And of course we're interested in work on kind of vagal nerve tone and things that are becoming more popular within psychotherapy. Okay, so just kind of, so what we're looking at, and what within CFT is this kind of a balancing of a wise mind. So this kind of diagram shows how we're interested in how our kind of an insight into the involved nature and the functions of our minds. So how an understanding of that, so we can kind of effectively, we know what we're working with, if you like. Compassion-focused therapy focuses a lot on motivation. So we argue that compassion is a motivation. It's something that organizes the structures within your brain, and that actually we're very guided by motivations. We're very driven by motivations, and that motivations have a relationship with our emotions. We're also, of course, interested in exploring cognitions and behaviours. But one thing is thinking about how we might be able to change our motivations in some way, or and often this is through trying to cultivate things like mind awareness, differentiation, you know, integration, self-soothing and self-reassuring. But again, underneath this is this idea that we want to help ourselves to be motivated to cultivate what is helpful and not harmful to self and others. Okay, I'm mindful of the time, so what we find within those bipolar diagnosis is often, if we look at this through social mentality theory, we find that individuals can be caught up in a competitive social mentality. So in regards to areas like social comparison, confidence, assertiveness, libido, positive affect, grandiosity, creativity, etc., when we are feeling when we're more likely to be in a mania, we're more likely to experience a kind of up-rank process. So we feel like we are a winner, we feel like we're gaining. If we, it's all of these things are kind of at a heightened state. Everything feels good. Our position in the world and our position with other people feels good. The problem is that when it goes down, what we experience then is a kind of a reverse of that. So this is what we would see as an example of a down rank process, where we feel like a loser and we feel defeated. So all of those areas in which actually we would feel that we were doing well at, actually now we feel the reverse. And that's challenging. But so that there is this kind of it's this kind of extreme swing, feeling like you're a winner to feeling like you're a loser. So one of the things that we're interested in trying to help our clients explore is how we can kind of switch from a competitive social mentality to, which is about being in competition with others. What is my position in relation to other people? Is it when I feel great? Is it good? When I feel bad, is it terrible? So what we want to try and do is to help people to switch to a more caring social mentality that is more care focused. It isn't focused on competition, it's focused on care, and that's both towards the self and towards others. It encourages being helpful. It encourages empathy, sensitivity, insight, respect. And we're particularly focused on sharing and caring, or much more motivated to engage in sharing behaviour and engaging in wisdom seeking. And what we know is that, you know, if we can change our mentality, change our social mentality, if we can switch from a competitive social mentality to a caring social mentality, well, this can actually have significant changes in our brain state. So, I mean, we can all kind of imagine that, thinking of, you know, the way that we might feel about a group of people if we're about to start a race with them. So we're in competition with each other. So, you know, that it's important to you to win, for example. We might feel very differently about the people around us than we would if we were engaged in a cooperative activity. So, you know, if we all had to work, you know, we worked together, or we were in an environment where there was no competition, we could just be together and you know, kind of enjoy each other's company. So we know that actually those two different environments will feel differently about the other people around us. So just quickly, some of the specific core features, and these made up the intervention, which was a 12-module compassion-focused therapy intervention. We offer kind of quite a clear definition of compassion as an evolved algorithm guided by new brain competencies. So what that means is that part of the evolution of our brains is been hugely influenced by our mammalian ancestors. And so compassion is closely related to the evolution of caring behaviour, which of course is associated with our mammalian ancestors. And effectively, you know, when we're talking about algorithms, we're talking about, you know, if they then be. So compassion, in a way, is a part of a response to, you know, see pain, give caring, for example. But there are far better explanations within the literature. So again, we do a lot of work on psychoeducation, thinking about, you know, that our brains are actually quite complicated. They can work really well, but they also, you know, kind of can be very, very difficult. And we kind of didn't get a choice over that. The conflicts of having a multi-mind, where we can experience all these different things. The importance of neurophysiological processes and the functions of caring motives, so secure base, safe haven for emotion regulation and well-being. Thinking about body work, so the influence of our posture, breath training, and all those kind of things. The importance of psychological competencies, so like reasoning, mindfulness, empathy, mentalization to guide and underpin compassion and motivation. This a clear motivation of cultivating a caring connection to self and others. Compassion that's not just a set of skills, but adopted as a self-identity. So I kind of guess in a similar way to, you know, kind of Carl Rogers spoke a lot about, you know, that the core conditions where we're a way of being. These were not about techniques that we just switch on because we want to perform them for our clients. They're interventions that we can use. Actually, these are ways of being. This is about who we are and who we are with others. And I think compassion is the same way. And certainly within our community, this, you know, we talk about this a lot, about, you know, that being, you know, a commitment to compassion. This is an aspect of who we are. And we make this commitment that may I live to be helpful and not harmful. And so part of how can I cultivate the wisdom to be helpful and not harmful? We do quite a lot of work with self-criticism and self-conscious emotions such as shame and guilt, and I'll talk a bit about that shortly. We're interested in working with what we consider to be the big three threat emotions: anger, anxiety, and sadness. And we'll also do a lot of work with fears, blocks, and resistances to compassion, and also to positive emotion and engaging with the threat system. You know, so because a lot of this work is really difficult, because it's involving really difficult material and really difficult life experiences. So the study, right? So the study came about because Paul attended a meeting at a specialist centre in the Midlands for those who had a bipolar diagnosis. So it was a specialist bipolar centre effectively. And here he elicited volunteers for a study exploring a compassion-focused therapy group intervention. Okay, so the study began 1 year later with 10 people. Now, for various reasons, life, moving away, change of job, etc. The study was completed by 6 participants. Okay, that was initially intended as a 12-week intervention, but an additional 13 weeks were added, mainly because the amount of material that the trainers had wanted to get through in 12 weeks, they hadn't been able to get through all of it. So it was thought that actually to complete the program properly, another 13 weeks was needed. Now there was a break between the 12 and 13 weeks of about 3 months, and this was due to ethics, going through ethics for an extension. So the entire study in itself took place for over 30 weeks. Okay, we have these are the wonderful researchers. And it's what's really great is that we can see some wonderful international collaboration here. So we had advice from Dr. June Gruber at the University of Colorado. We also had our colleagues Dr. Nicola Petrocchi and Dr. Simone Celli from Italy, from John Cabot University and the University of Rome in Italy, who worked on certain aspects of our data. But mainly most of our researchers are from the UK, and many of which are from the University of Derby. And something that's particularly lovely about this is that Joanne Raven, who was involved in the thematic analysis aspect of this study, is in fact a Roehampton alumni. So that's kind of a nice synchronicity. Okay, so this is just briefly talking about the process of the research, because we gathered a range of self-reports, data and HRV data at regular intervals. Now, the focus groups themselves were taken after the first 12 sessions of group CFT, after the 3-month break, so before they started the next 13 weeks of compassion-focused therapy, and then, of course, at the end. So they were kind of, they had about the same interval between when they were taken. So we were interested, effectively, we were interested in exploring the experiences of individuals receiving compassion-focused therapy, of course. They're interested in questions like efficacy, etc. But also thinking about, what is it like? What is it like to have that, to be part of a group going through this? Going through this group process. What is this like? So the questions that we asked were related to understanding of the evolutionary model and how it might relate to your life situation. So, how did you experience psychoeducation? What was that like for you? Questions about the exercises and the practices, bearing in mind, they did a lot of breathing, mindfulness, and visualisation exercises that were focused on developing a compassionate sense of self and a compassionate image. So it was, we were curious about, well, actually, what is your experience of these practices like? Then the third kind of set of questions were related to feelings of self-criticism. So thinking about, did the exercises and materials kind of influence the way that you think about yourself and your relationship with self-criticism? And then finally, we're interested in whether, of course, the course has helped in any kind of general way with issues of, has the course and its modules kind of helped? Has it changed your approach to how you think about your emotions and your moods and how you manage that? So what did we find? And I want to kind of take a moment, I think, just to kind of just send deep appreciation to the participants in this study, who are just wonderful, courageous, fantastic, and it was just a real pleasure to hear their reflections, and really very inspiring as well, I think. Really fantastic. So huge appreciation to them. So when we talked about psychoeducation, so this is an extract from one of our participants. He kind of, when thinking about this, what was psychoeducation, or the psychoeducation aspect, like for you? So, you know, it's the way our brains are formed, and the way that we think kind of becomes our norm. So then all of a sudden you're in a group situation where they're explaining stuff to you about how the brain works and that, but you can change it. Now that's huge as well, because you don't think you can. You just think, what am I and who am I, and how I think is just what it is. But being presented with information that tells us actually by doing certain things, you can change that habit. And it takes time because you're so used to that default, possibly being negative or beating yourself up or being a critic, not being nice to yourself. And then this information is kind of presented in a way like, oh my God, there's another way to look at this. I think that's really significant about the psychoeducative element, is the role in which this is offering participants a chance to see things from a different perspective, a chance to kind of look at their relationship with their moods and with how they see themselves, and to kind of anchor it in a sense of thinking about actually say, what's the role of your brain working in this? And a lot of our participants reflected on finding this actually incredibly illuminative, that it really helped them to see things in a different way. Another example of this is, and I think this is just brilliant. I really love this metaphor that this participant has offered. You know, thinking about their role and their position and kind of in effect what goes on in their minds, is them. He said, you know, the only way I can explain what I took out of this, because I'm not the most academic person in the world, I tend to just soak things up and then wait for the reactions to come out. And anyway, the only thing I could come up with was an analogy that I made up to try and explain it to a friend of mine. And it's like, and that is like, there's a farmer and a farmhand out in the field, and they've both got to plough fields. Now, the farmhand has got no idea. He's just being paid to do a job, and that's the job he's going to do. The farmer, he's got to plough fields as well, but he's got the knowledge. He understands what the greater gain is going to be and the work he's going to do. But it doesn't change the fact that he's got to do hard work to get there. And this is the only way I can understand it. So I know it's going to be hard-blooded work, but the knowledge I've taken in, what I now know, has made it easier for me to accept that hard work. I think that's just an extraordinary analogy, and it explains it so beautifully, you know, about how what we see, where we are and how we see things around us. But you know, I think another wonderful point that they make is knowing actually with this, you know, if I'm going to undergo this challenge of actually really engaging in psychotherapeutic work, it's hard bloody work, but knowing why I'm doing it and kind of having a broader idea about what's going on, that's what helps me keep going. That's what helps me to do it. So kind of, you know, the participants sometimes talked about feeling sometimes that they couldn't see the wood for the trees. I just cannot get enough of a grip on, you know, everything just seems too vast and too huge. So having this kind of more localized, you know, being able to see your position and where you might be going was really important. Okay. A really important part of compassion focused therapy, I guess it's become a bit of a kind of one of our slogans, if you like, is this idea about it's not your fault. And it's something that we often say quite explicitly in therapy. And the role of it's not your fault is really about noting that so much of what goes on in our minds is not of our choosing. You know, as far as we're aware, none of us kind of chose the brains and the bodies that we were born into. We didn't choose the circumstances of our birth, and yet we will have to kind of live with the consequences of that. And yet there's so much, for so many of us, there's so much bound up in our experiences of feeling that I am at fault. There's something intrinsically wrong with me. So the role of it's not your fault is recognizing how much of what you experience is of your choosing. Would you have chosen to have had your emotions kind of organized in this way? No, probably not. And what we found actually in this study is that, as we found kind of elsewhere, is that actually this concept of, look, this is not your fault, is really quite powerful. So one participant said, you know, it had quite a profound effect to me when we were doing the meditation and he used the words, "It's not your fault." I had a huge weight lifted, and it came out in tears, which is how I deal with it. So I think that consciously had some effect in letting go of perhaps me, you know, feeling the way I am was my fault. I think that's kind of really powerful, you know, feeling the way I am was my fault. And so it's kind of trying to kind of address, you know, the sense in which actually, to what extent I am responsible for for who I am. It's my fault. You know, and then another kind of participant said, you know, I found it's to be quite therapeutic in a sort of way, you know, because that's kind of, it's not your fault thing came in, you know, that because it's your biology and the way that you're made. It made us then recognize that some of the things that we went through as a bipolar person weren't your fault. I think that's really, really powerful. Some of the things that we went through as a bipolar person weren't your fault. And then finally, you know, this point was, again, you know, what we went through as a bipolar, it wasn't your fault because it's your biology and it's the way that you're made. So there's a sense in which, of course, we see this role of it's not your fault as something that's de-shaming. You know, that you didn't ask for this. You know, this is not your fault. Right. It's often quite powerful and quite profound moments in therapy. There was quite a lot of, you know, we talked quite a lot about participants. Sorry, talked a lot about self-criticism. You know, and again, the power of the self-critic kind of never ceases to sort of, yeah, of just how powerful basically that our self-critics are. So one participant said, you know, I think the thing was, you know, actually this sinking feeling came about from my self-critic. It's the critic coming up and saying, you're going to mess it up, don't get your hopes up. You know, this sinking feeling would go in and I would be letting everything go. So this fear, you know, often when you're most vulnerable, when you're really anxious and the critic shows up, and all it does is tell you that you're going to make a mess of things, don't get your hopes out, you know, you're going to ruin all of this, and this just crippling feeling, you know, and you know, the language that participants use is really quite kind of visceral and very powerful about, you know, what this stuff, just how much damage the self-critic does. But this is, I think, a wonderful example of actually how being able to see the self-critic for what it is and working with our self-critic in a compassionate way can actually hopefully help us to shift the way that we can respond to certain life difficulties. So in this example, a participant was explaining, you know, I'd just come out of a weekend when I noticed that I was struggling because I was tired, and the behaviour that I had going along with that, you know, was binge eating, and you know, and when I came to the realisation that I had done that 2 nights in a row, and you know, I'd really worked hard on not being hard, you know. I'd done that 2 nights in a row, and I really worked on not being hard on myself, you know. Which is that compassionate side that, yeah, I know the reason why I behaved like that. Kids weren't around, I was working extra, I was tired, you know, so I mean, that's fine. Okay, now move on and just carry on with this and this week and eat better and you'll be fine. So that for me is huge. I haven't just gone down the line of, oh, okay, well, here's an excuse to just batter me loads, you know. So I think that's really quite amazing. So here we have someone who's found, you know, actually I've been kind of, you know, this isn't how I want to be. And rather than actually kind of a critic getting involved and kind of, you know, pointing out all the reasons why you were, you know, how much you failed and seeing it as a failure, actually the compassionate self is then, okay, let's start again. So I think that's a really wonderful example of how a more kind of a compassionate relationship with ourselves can help to shift the way that we respond to kind of times of difficulty or times when we feel disappointed. Fears, blocks and resistances, of course, often come up because compassion is hard. You know, it's hard. And, you know, for many of us, it will not be something that we're familiar with. You know, self-soothing, being kind to ourselves. You know, for many of us, that would be an alien. That would be an alien concept. But they were kind of really interesting. Our participants shared with us some really interesting reflections on particular fears, blocks, and resistances that they had. And one of them was about the visualisations and guided practices. So, you know, for some participants, they would experience what's called amphantasia, which is the ability to see things within an inner, you know, I can't actually imagine things. So you tell me to think of a ship, and I can't visualise that. So there was, you know, for some people, there were barriers to, I actually can't engage in this kind of visualisation practice. But one thing that was really fascinating and really, really beautiful, actually, was the way in which other, you know, when other people would share what they'd experienced, that actually this inspired some of those who found it more challenging. They could kind of, okay, I think I can kind of go with that. So that actually there's something about sharing the experiences that people had actually could inspire other people, or give them a different kind of something to think about, different form of inspiration. So that was kind of really, I think that's really interesting about the way that groups might work in that way. But then again, this is kind of a way, I think, in which we can see that a more kind of compassionate way of responding to challenges is really useful. You know, so this participant said, you know, I did struggle with it, and I'm not going to say I still don't struggle, because my attention span is not the best. But again, going back to knowing that about myself, it's not my fault that my attention span is not very good, because I've been formed this way. I've been like this all of my life. So if I can only do 3 minutes of meditation, that's 3 minutes that I've got on my side. So I'm not going to beat myself up because I didn't get to the end of the meditation. That's great. So the meditation itself is not about being competition. So we're not getting sort of sucked into that competitive social mentality. This is about, you know, 3 minutes is 3 minutes. There were some lovely things about group and about connections between the group. So one participant shared, you know, that I set up a WhatsApp group, you know, and you know, it doesn't matter the content or the nonsense that we've done in there, just having a little reach out from all of us, you know. And in one case said, I'll remind you about the wings. But the wings is in reference to a participant whose compassionate image was about an angel with wings, and the wings would envelop her. So, you know, that was the way in which they were going to be, they wanted to be there to support each other going through. And then, you know, another participant said, you know, I find I have an idea and I think, I wish I could tell it to my people. I think that's just wonderful. You know, I've seen everything in my life is like you can shine a light on things. So how can we can share this journey of shining a light on things together? Again, compassionate imagery was really powerful. And one participant, you know, explained it as a little lady who's cheering me on all the time, and she's there, and I know she's there, and I don't even have to take my breathing down. It feels like she's on my shoulders, sort of thing. So actually, one of the, I think, really powerful things about being able to have, you know, 25 weeks of working together to developing compassionate mind training skills, cultivating a compassionate mind, is how we start to know that things start with practice, things start to become automatic. Also being able to find our own way with this thing. You know, I've got a little lady cheering me on. That was something that was right for that participant found to support herself. And there is quite a lot of space, I think, for our own creative, you know, our own creative involvement and, you know, our own voice to help shape the kind of imagery that's helpful for us. Okay, this is I think one of my favorite quotes. Because I think it's really powerful. And this was from towards the end of the last focus group, when one of the participants is reflecting on, you know, the journey and thinking about things that they were resistant about. And she said, you look, there's a fear. A fear I had was if you looked at these things and you broke them down, I might lose a part of me, that my creativity might go, and all of that might be tied up in that unanswered question. Yeah, I don't think that's true now. I think that actually shining a light on everything and doing this it does not kill off the creativity, it does not kill off the magic. And I think I've always wanted that, but now I'm like, oh, that's totally possible, because it just is. So this is about being able, you know, I like it doesn't kill off the creativity and it doesn't kill off the magic. So, you know, being able to And I think that's an important part of the psychoeducation. It's not about trying to disenchant, if you like. And I think it can be done in a way and shared with participants in a way that it is a sharing, it is a collaboration. But actually, what's great is when we're able to see that actually shining a light on everything and looking at things in this way, you know, it doesn't stop anything magical, it doesn't stop anything enchanting, and it can become part of my own, you know, what's right for me. So there's a reflexivity here about what I need. I don't want to lose my creativity, but actually my creativity can exist alongside this. So it's thinking about actually how do we integrate psychoeducation as well into our own needs. I mean, there is some connections between bipolar disorder and creativity. Again, Redfield Jameson has kind of written a book about this. It's not been all that well researched, but certainly there does seem to be some relationship between creativity does seem to be kind of a part of that experience. Okay, so nearly finished. So just obviously, as a therapist, I'm kind of really interested in how research can inform practice implications. It's something I'm really kind of passionate about, how we can draw on research, research findings to kind of inspire and inform our practice. And I think, you know, in this way, you know, these were 6 people within our study, and you know, thinking about all the other participants in the studies, it's a community. You know, this is kind of a community of clients and a community of people who, you know, as therapists, we have so much to learn from. And I think there's a sense in which we're honouring our clients by kind of drawing on research, because these are our clients as reflections as well. But I think some of the practice implications that we're kind of thinking about at the moment are, you know, the significance of group and caring connectedness. That played an important part. So it's worth, you know, thinking about how actually we're going on this journey as a group of people, and as a group of people who certainly by the end of the journey really cared about each other. That's really important. And I think as kind of therapists or as facilitators, okay, so what positive contributions might we be able to make to that, to kind of help, you know, and how actually we are part of the group. So how can we work in, you know, in that way? Working with fears, blocks and resistances is kind of being aware, I think something that's really important is acknowledging, yes, it is hard. There's nothing wrong with you. This is hard work. And of course, in compassion focused therapy, you know, fears, blocks and resistances often are, but they are the work. Because, you know, exploring the fears, blocks and resistances that we have to those things are really, really important part of our therapeutic process. I think there's something really important about being able to have 25 weeks, you know, and the space that gives you to work through material, and about kind of, you know, the potential benefits of longer term therapy. But also being able to accept what our clients, you know, our participants' experiences are. You know, what can we learn from them about what fears, blocks and resistances are, and how do we work together to kind of work with those. Again, I think it also pays testament to the power of imagery cultivated by the self to support the self. So having the space actually for individuals to be able to bring their own tones, their own textures, their own imagination to support themselves, I think is really, really, really powerful. You know, that again, having that space and that respect for one's creativity, you know, if appropriate, letting, you know, and I think visualization practices and certainly exercises like compassionate image and compassionate other, it does, you know, there is so much space for us to colour it in our own ways. And that's important because ultimately these are for us, they're there to support us. And while we may very well be inspired by other people, and that's great within that kind of environment, and there's something very important about empowering our clients, but giving the space and respect to our clients to kind of create the imagery that they need to support themselves. And I think also what we found with CFT is that psychoeducation can be empowering. It can be empowering to know this is how, this is how my brain works. And actually, these are things, practices that I can do that actually I might feel a bit better if I breathe in a certain way. I might feel a bit better. But having that knowledge about how your body works gives you so many more options about how you work with it. And certainly our participants reflected that, they found it really, really empowering. And one participant kind of described it as having a Haynes model of the mind, so kind of like one of those instruction manuals. But it's, it's empowering. The knowledge is empowering. And then finally, I think something that's really important is the role of collaborative working, sharing, and meaning making together. I think this is true in all, for therapy generally, is thinking about this role of collaborative working. So, for example, if we're doing guided practices with clients, thinking about the difference between sitting and watching your client do a guided practice, doing a guided practice with your client. So this real sense of how do we really kind of view the sense that we're on this journey together. And that's something that's very significant within compassion focused therapy, and a lot of my colleagues have kind of written and done a lot of work on their own practice, and actually self-practice and self-reflection on the part of us is as important as the work that we do with our clients. But really kind of we're sharing the journey of discovery together and learning from each other. And I think that's another wonderful parallel between research and practice. So I think that's some time, maybe just